I'm Emma Sinclair, 35, and until 3 days ago, I thought I was the beloved little sister who'd do anything for family. I'd been quietly building my investment portfolio for years, turning my inheritance from grandma into an $80,000 nest egg that I'd promised to my sister Rachel for her dream wedding. But when I showed up to her final dress fitting with the check in my purse ready to surprise her, I overheard her on the phone with our mother. "Emma's so pathetic," she laughed. "Still single, still desperate for our approval. She'd probably pay for the whole wedding just to feel included. We don't even really want her there, but her money's useful." The words hit me like ice water. I stood frozen in that bridal shop, check trembling in my hands, realizing that the family I'd sacrificed everything for saw me as nothing more than an ATM. But they had no idea what was coming next. Growing up, I was always the middle child who learned to make herself small, while my older brother David got praise for his athletic achievements and my younger sister Rachel commanded attention with her dramatic flair. I found my place in the quiet corners of our family dynamic. I was the reliable one, the steady one, the one who never caused problems. When Grandma Helen passed away 3 years ago, she left each of us grandchildren a modest inheritance. David immediately spent his on a new truck. Rachel used hers for a European vacation that she documented endlessly on social media. But I saw something different in that money, an opportunity. I'd always been good with numbers, quietly managing my own finances while my siblings lived paycheck to paycheck. I took Grandma's $15,000 and started investing. Nothing flashy, nothing risky. I researched mutual funds, read financial blogs late into the night, and slowly built a portfolio. While my family thought I was just being my usual boring self, I was actually watching my money grow. The $15,000 became $30,000, then $50,000. I picked up freelance consulting work in my spare time, every extra dollar going into my investments. The jewelry box Grandma left me sits on my dresser, a constant reminder of her practical wisdom. Inside, along with her modest pearls and simple gold rings, I keep the original inheritance documents. Sometimes I open it just to remember her words. "Emma, you've got a good head on your shoulders. Don't let anyone make you feel small for being smart with money." But somewhere along the way, I started using my growing wealth as a way to earn love. When David needed help with his mortgage payment, I quietly transferred $2,000. When Rachel wanted a designer handbag for her birthday, I bought it without thinking twice. Each time, I felt that brief moment of appreciation, of being needed, of being valued. My parents praised my generosity but never seemed curious about how I could afford such gifts on my marketing coordinator's salary. They'd accepted my help so easily, so naturally, that I began to wonder if my only value to them was financial. But I pushed those thoughts away. Family helps family, right? That's what love looks like. I should have recognized the pattern earlier. The way they called me when they needed something, but rarely just to talk. The way my achievements at work were met with polite nods while Rachel's latest Instagram post got enthusiastic comments. The way they'd make plans without me, then invite me only when they needed someone to pick up the tab. By the time Rachel got engaged, I had built my investment portfolio to just over $80,000. It represented 3 years of careful planning, countless hours of research, and a lifestyle of deliberate frugality. I drove a 10-year-old Honda while Rachel leased a new BMW. I shopped at thrift stores while she bought designer clothes. I meal prepped on Sundays while she dined out every night. But none of that mattered when I saw the joy on her face announcing her engagement. Finally, I thought, here was my chance to be the hero of the family story. Here was my opportunity to prove my worth in a way that would be remembered forever. The engagement party was held at my parents' house 2 weeks after Rachel's announcement. I watched her float around the backyard in a white sundress, showing off her ring to every guest, while her fiancé Marcus stood proudly beside her. They looked perfect together, both beautiful, both confident, both completely comfortable being the center of attention. I was genuinely happy for her. Despite our complicated family dynamics, Rachel was my sister, and she deserved love and happiness. When she pulled me aside during the party, her eyes sparkling with excitement, I felt that familiar warmth of being included in her world. "Emma, I need to talk to you about something important," she said, leading me to the quiet corner of the garden where Mom's roses bloomed. "Marcus and I have been talking about the wedding, and we want something really special. Something that shows how much our family means to us." I nodded, expecting her to ask me to be a bridesmaid or help with planning details. "The thing is," she continued, "the venue we want, the Riverside Manor, it's more expensive than we initially thought, and with Marcus still paying off his student loans, and my salary at the boutique, well, we're going to need some help making our dream wedding happen." She pulled out her phone and showed me photos of the venue, a stunning historic mansion with manicured gardens, and a ballroom that looked like something from a fairy tale. Even through the screen, I could see why she'd fallen in love with it. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "It really is. Emma, I know this is a big ask, but would you consider helping us with some of the wedding costs? I know you're good with money, and you've always been so generous with family." The request itself wasn't shocking. I'd been expecting it, honestly.
What surprised me was the matter-of-fact way she presented it, as if my contribution was already assumed. There was no hesitation, no apparent concern about the financial burden she was placing on me. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. Rachel bit her lip, a gesture that had gotten her out of trouble since childhood. "Well, the venue alone is $35,000. And then there's the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the band. If we do everything we want, we're looking at around $80,000 total, the exact amount I had in my investment account." The coincidence felt almost mystical, like the universe was telling me this was meant to be. "I could help with that," I heard myself saying, even as a small voice in my head wondered if I was making a mistake. Rachel's face lit up like Christmas morning. She threw her arms around me, squeezing tight. "Emma, you're the best sister ever. I knew I could count on you. This is going to be the most amazing wedding ever." She immediately started talking about all the details, the flowers she wanted, the menu options, the band she'd heard at a friend's wedding. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself getting caught up in her excitement. For the first time in months, I felt truly needed, truly valued. Within days, Rachel had created what she called her wedding binder, a thick folder filled with vendor quotes, magazine clippings, and detailed timelines. Every few days, she'd call me with updates, her voice bubbling with excitement as she described her latest findings. "Emma, I found the perfect florist. She's a little more expensive than we planned, but her work is incredible. And I was thinking about upgrading the menu to include that salmon dish we talked about. Oh, and Marcus and I decided we really want a videographer too." Each conversation brought new additions, new upgrades, new expenses. The wedding budget, initially $60,000, crept steadily upward. But every time I felt a flutter of concern, Rachel would say something that made me feel special, needed, important. "I'm so lucky to have a sister who understands how important this day is," she'd say. Or, "Emma, you're literally making my dreams come true." My parents were effusive in their praise of my generosity. Mom would hug me and say how proud she was to have such a caring daughter. Dad would clap me on the shoulder and talk about family loyalty. For the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged, like I was an essential part of something important. I told myself that this was what family looked like, supporting each other through life's biggest moments. Rachel would do the same for me someday, wouldn't she? When I found someone to marry, when I needed help, she'd be there. That's what sisters did. But late at night, when I looked at my dwindling bank account balance, I sometimes wondered if I was buying love rather than receiving it. Looking back, I realized the signs were always there. I just chose not to see them, or maybe I convinced myself they meant something different than they actually did. Rachel was born when I was 6 years old, and from the moment she entered the world, she commanded attention in ways that seemed almost magical to my child's mind. She was a beautiful baby with huge blue eyes and blonde curls that caught the light just right. Strangers would stop Mom on the street to comment on how gorgeous she was, while I stood quietly beside the stroller, invisible. The photo albums tell the story better than my memories ever could. In our family pictures, Rachel is always front and center, the shining star around which the rest of us orbited. There's one photo from her 5th birthday party that perfectly captures our family dynamic. Rachel sits at the head of the table in a princess dress, beaming at her elaborate cake, while the rest of us are arranged around her like supporting characters in her personal movie. I'm in the background of that photo, wearing a hand-me-down dress that was too big for me, applauding along with everyone else. Even at 11 years old, I understood my role. I was the audience to Rachel's performance. School conferences were another telling indicator. When my parents met with my teachers, they were polite but brief. "Emma's doing well," they'd say afterward. "She's a good student." When they met with Rachel's teachers, however, the conversations were animated, engaged, full of questions and follow-up appointments. Rachel's report cards were celebrated with special dinners. Mine were acknowledged with a pat on the head. I learned early that academic achievement wasn't particularly valued in our household, at least not for me. When I won the regional math competition in 8th grade, my parents missed the ceremony because it conflicted with Rachel's dance recital. When I was accepted into the Honor Society, they forgot to mention it to extended family. But when Rachel made the cheerleading squad, they called everyone they knew and posted about it on social media for weeks. The college application process was perhaps the most painful example of this pattern. I had worked incredibly hard to earn a partial scholarship to a good state university, and I was proud of my achievement, but the family celebration was muted, almost perfunctory. 2 years later, when Rachel barely graduated high school and decided she wanted to attend an expensive private arts college, my parents took out a second mortgage on their house to pay for it. "Rachel's creative spirit needs nurturing," Mom explained when I asked about the different treatment. "She's got such a gift. You're more practical, Emma. You'll do fine anywhere." That word practical became my label. I was the practical one, the sensible one, the one who didn't need special attention or extra support. I was dependable, reliable, steady. In other words, I was boring. Rachel, on the other hand, was vibrant, creative, special. She needed protection from the harsh realities of the world. She needed financial support, emotional encouragement, and constant validation. She was the family's precious flower that required careful tending. The irony wasn't lost on me that my practical nature had actually led to far greater financial success than Rachel's creative spirit. While she struggled to make ends meet working part-time at a boutique, I had quietly built a career and a substantial investment portfolio. But somehow my achievements were seen as less impressive, less worthy of celebration. Even now at family gatherings, the conversation patterns were predictable. Rachel's latest dating drama would dominate the dinner table discussion, with everyone offering advice and support. My work promotions or investment gains were met with polite nods and quick subject changes. Rachel's problems were fascinating. My successes were boring. I remember one particularly painful Thanksgiving dinner when Rachel announced she was thinking about going back to school for her master's degree. The entire family lit up with excitement, discussing programs and financial aid options. I mentioned that I was considering buying a rental property as an investment, and Dad literally yawned. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, already turning back to Rachel. "Now tell us more about this photography program you're interested in." The worst part was that I genuinely loved my sister. Despite the obvious favoritism, despite the way she had learned to work the system to her advantage, I wanted her to be happy. I wanted her to succeed. I wanted her to have everything she desired. But I also wanted to matter. I wanted my parents to be proud of me, to brag about me to their friends, to see me as more than just the reliable background player in Rachel's starring role. I wanted to be special too. So when Rachel's wedding planning began, I saw it as my chance to finally be the hero of a family story. I could be the one who made her dreams come true. I could be the generous, loving sister who sacrificed for her family. Finally, I could be more than just practical Emma. I could be Emma the savior. Looking at those old family photos now, I see the truth I was too blind to recognize then. I was never going to be the golden child. I was never going to be the favorite. But I had something far more valuable than their fleeting approval. I had the strength and intelligence to build my own life on my own terms. The months leading up to Rachel's engagement had been some of the most financially disciplined of my life, though I didn't realize at the time that I was unconsciously preparing for this moment. Every financial decision I made was careful, calculated, and surprisingly prescient. My bank statements from that period tell the story of a woman who was quietly building something significant while everyone around her remained oblivious. While my coworker grabbed coffee from the expensive shop downstairs, I brought a thermos from home. While my friends planned weekend getaways, I stayed in and researched investment strategies. While Rachel posted photos from expensive restaurants, I meal prepped and ate lunch at my desk. I had developed a system that felt almost obsessive in its precision. Every Friday, I would transfer exactly 30% of my paycheck into my investment account before I could be tempted to spend it on anything else. I tracked every expense in a detailed spreadsheet, categorizing purchases down to the penny. I set up automatic transfers so that any money left in my checking account at the end of each month would join my growing portfolio. The sacrifice wasn't always easy. I remember one particularly painful moment when my college friends invited me to join them for a long weekend in Napa Valley. The photos they posted later showed them laughing over wine tastings and gourmet meals, living the kind of carefree life that seemed so appealing. But I stayed home, reminded myself of my long-term goals, and felt satisfied when I saw my account balance increase by another $1,000 that month. I became an expert at finding free entertainment. Museum free days, library events, hiking trails, farmers markets. I mapped out an entire lifestyle that cost almost nothing but still felt rich and fulfilling. My apartment was small but carefully decorated with thrift store finds and DIY projects. I learned to cook elaborate meals from simple ingredients, turning frugality into a creative challenge. The most significant sacrifice was my social life. Dating became complicated when I couldn't afford to split expensive dinner bills without compromising my savings goals. I turned down invitations, made excuses, and gradually became known as the friend who was always busy or on a tight budget. Some relationships faded naturally as my priorities became clear. But every month when I reviewed my portfolio performance, I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that made all the sacrifices worthwhile. I was building something real, something substantial, something that was entirely my own achievement. The numbers on my screen represented hours of research, months of discipline, and years of delayed gratification. When Rachel's engagement was announced, those bank statements suddenly took on new meaning. The $80,000 I had accumulated wasn't just money anymore. It was the perfect amount to give my sister the wedding of her dreams. The coincidence felt like destiny, like every sacrifice I had made was leading to this moment of ultimate generosity. I spent hours researching wedding costs, wanting to understand exactly what my contribution would mean. I looked up venue prices, catering costs, and photography packages. I read wedding planning blogs and studied budget breakdowns from real couples. The more I learned, the more excited I became about being able to remove all financial stress from Rachel's planning process. I even drove by the Riverside Manor one evening after work, sitting in my car and imagining Rachel's wedding day. The mansion was even more beautiful in person, with its ivy-covered walls and perfectly manicured gardens. I pictured her walking down the aisle in that magical setting, surrounded by family and friends, with me knowing that I had made it all possible.
The planning process became my new obsession. I created spreadsheets comparing different vendor options, always choosing the higher quality, more expensive choices because I wanted Rachel to have the best of everything. When she mentioned wanting a particular photographer whose work she'd seen on Instagram, I researched his packages and budget for the premium option. When she fell in love with a florist's elaborate centerpiece designs, I calculated the costs and assured her we could make it happen. I started carrying the checkbook for my investment account everywhere, imagining the moment when I would present Rachel with the full amount and see her face light up with joy and gratitude. I rehearsed different ways to give her the money, maybe a dramatic reveal at a family dinner, or perhaps a quiet moment between just the two of us where I could tell her how much she meant to me. My coworkers noticed the change in my demeanor. I was happier, more energetic, constantly talking about wedding plans and how excited I was to help my sister. I showed them pictures of venues and dress options, glowing with pride about being such an important part of Rachel's big day. "Your sister is so lucky to have you," my friend Janet said one day over lunch. "Not everyone would be so generous." I beamed at the compliment, feeling validated in my decision. This was what family meant, putting the people you love ahead of your own interests, making sacrifices that showed how much you cared. Looking back now, I can see how those bank statements represented more than just financial discipline. They represented 3 years of my life, 3 years of choices and sacrifices and dreams deferred. Every line item was a small piece of my freedom, my security, my future that I was preparing to hand over without question. I had built the perfect trap for myself, using my own money as bait and my desperate need for family acceptance as the spring mechanism. All that remained was for someone to reveal the truth about what my generosity actually meant to the people I was so eager to help. The first warning sign came in a text message that I initially dismissed as wedding stress. Rachel had sent me a screenshot of an expensive wedding cake design with the message, "Found the cake. Emma can cover this too, right? It's only $3,000 more than we budgeted." The casual assumption that I would automatically cover any budget overruns bothered me, but I pushed the feeling aside. Weddings were stressful, I told myself. Rachel was just excited and not thinking clearly about the financial implications. But then the messages kept coming. A floral arrangement that was only $2,000 over budget. A photographer upgrade that was barely $1,500 more. A band that was just $800 above what we discussed. Each request came with the same assumption that I would cover it, that my money was essentially her money to spend as she pleased. The language in her text began to shift in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Instead of asking if I could help with additional costs, she would simply inform me of decisions she'd made. Upgraded the linens to the premium package. Total is now $85,000. No question, no request for approval, just a statement of fact. When I tried to express concern about the escalating costs, her responses were dismissive. "Emma, it's my wedding day. This is the most important day of my life. Surely you understand that we can't cut corners." Or, "I thought you wanted me to have the wedding of my dreams. Was I wrong about that?" The guilt trips were subtle but effective. Anytime I hesitated about a new expense, Rachel would frame it as a question of my love and support. "I guess I just thought my sister would want me to be happy," she'd say with a sigh that carried across the phone line like a physical weight. Even more troubling was how the rest of my family had begun to treat me. At a Sunday dinner, when I mentioned that I might need to set some budget limits, my mother actually laughed. "Oh, Emma, don't be so dramatic. You're always so worried about money. Just enjoy being part of something special for once." The phrase "for once" hit me like a slap. It implied that I was never part of anything special, that my usual role was as an outsider looking in. But instead of defending myself, I found myself apologizing and agreeing to cover another expense. Dad's approach was different but equally manipulative. He would put his arm around me and talk about family legacy, about how proud Grandma Helen would be to see her inheritance being used to bring the family together. "She always said you were the smart one with money, Emma. She'd love knowing you're taking care of your sister." The manipulation was so smooth, so wrapped in love and family loyalty, that it took me weeks to recognize it for what it was. Every conversation about money was framed in terms of my character. Was I generous or selfish? Did I love my family or was I just looking out for myself? Was I the kind of person who supported her sister's dreams or the kind who held others back? My brother David, who had been largely absent from the wedding planning, suddenly became very interested in my financial contribution. "It's really cool what you're doing for Rachel," he said during one family gathering. "I mean, I could never afford something like that." Good thing she has a sister who's got her priorities straight. The backhanded compliment stung. It suggested that my ability to contribute financially was somehow my primary value to the family, while also implying that I should be grateful for the opportunity to prove my worth through my checkbook.
I started screenshotting the text conversations, initially just to keep track of the changing budget numbers, but as I scrolled through them weeks later, I began to see patterns that I'd missed in real time. The way requests always came with emotional pressure, the way my concerns were dismissed or reframed as character flaws, the way my family had begun talking about Emma's wedding gift as if it was already decided, already spent, already assumed. There was one particularly telling exchange where Rachel asked me to cover upgraded transportation for the wedding party. When I asked if it was really necessary, she responded, "Emma, this is literally the least you could do. You're not even in the wedding party because you're single and it would look weird in photos. The least you can do is help make sure everyone else looks perfect." I read that message 3 times before the full cruelty of it sank in. Not only was she dismissing my concerns about money, but she was also casually revealing that I hadn't been included in the wedding party because my single status would somehow diminish the aesthetic of her photos. I was good enough to fund the wedding, but not good enough to be visibly part of it. When I called to talk about this, Rachel's response was to accuse me of being oversensitive. "I didn't mean it like that, Emma. God, you're so dramatic sometimes. I just meant that all my other friends are coupled up and the photos will be more symmetrical that way. Don't make this about you." But it was about me. It was about the growing realization that my family saw me primarily as a financial resource rather than a person deserving of love and respect. It was about the way my concerns were consistently minimized and my feelings dismissed. It was about the dawning understanding that I was being used. Still, I told myself these were just stress-induced communication problems. Once the wedding was over, things would go back to normal. My family would remember how much I'd sacrificed for them and treat me with the gratitude and appreciation I deserved. I just had to get through this difficult period. I had no idea that the worst revelation was still coming. The final dress fitting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at Bella's Bridal, an upscale boutique downtown that Rachel had fallen in love with months earlier. I had taken the afternoon off work specifically to be there for this moment, imagining it would be one of those special sister bonding experiences that I'd remember forever. I arrived early, as was my habit, and parked across the street from the shop. The late autumn sun was filtering through the boutique's large windows, casting everything in a warm golden light that seemed perfect for the occasion. I sat in my car for a few minutes, checking my purse to make sure the $80,000 cashier's check was still there, safely tucked into the zippered pocket where I'd been carrying it for weeks. This was going to be the moment. After the fitting, when Rachel was glowing with excitement about how perfect everything looked, I would pull out the check and tell her that all her wedding dreams were about to become reality. I had rehearsed the moment dozens of times, imagining her tears of joy, her grateful embrace, the way she'd call me the best sister in the world. As I walked toward the boutique, I could see Rachel through the window, standing on the circular platform in front of the 3-way mirror. Even from outside, she looked absolutely radiant in her dress, a stunning creation of silk and lace that fit her perfectly. Marcus was there too, sitting in one of the velvet chairs, looking at her with such obvious adoration that it made my heart happy for both of them. I was about to push open the door when I heard Rachel's voice, clear and unmistakable, coming from inside the shop. She was on her phone, probably talking to one of her bridesmaids about last-minute details. I paused, not wanting to interrupt what sounded like an important conversation. "No, seriously, it's actually perfect," Rachel was saying, her voice bright with laughter. "Emma's so pathetic, honestly. She's been saving money like some kind of crazy person for years, just sitting on this huge pile of cash, and now she gets to feel important for once in her life by paying for my wedding." I felt my stomach drop, but I told myself I must have misheard. Rachel wouldn't say something like that about me, not when I was about to make her dreams come true. But she kept talking, and her words became clearer, more devastating with each sentence. I mean, she's 29 and still single, still desperately trying to buy our love and approval. It's honestly kind of sad, but if she wants to throw away her entire savings account to feel like she matters to this family, who am I to stop her? The person on the other end of the phone must have said something, because Rachel laughed, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times but never directed at me with such cruelty. "Oh, Mom thinks it's hilarious. She was just saying yesterday how Emma's always been so desperate to be the favorite that she'd probably pay for my whole wedding just to feel included. We don't even really want her there, honestly, but her money's useful." Each word hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, my hand still reaching for the door handle, as my sister continued to demolish everything I thought I understood about our relationship. The best part is that she thinks this makes her some kind of martyr or saint. Like, oh, look at generous Emma, sacrificing everything for her family. But honestly, it just proves that she knows her money is the only interesting thing about her. She's boring, she's got no personality, and she's got no life of her own, so she's trying to buy her way into ours. I could see Marcus shifting uncomfortably in his chair, looking like he wanted to say something but didn't know how to interrupt. My heart went out to him for a moment. He seemed as shocked by Rachel's cruelty as I was. Trust me, after the wedding we're done. I'm not dealing with her clingy, desperate energy anymore. She can go back to her sad little apartment and her sad little life, and maybe she'll finally figure out that money can't buy you a personality. The phone conversation continued, but I couldn't hear it anymore over the roaring in my ears. My vision tunneled, and for a moment I thought I might actually faint right there on the sidewalk. The check in my purse felt like it was burning through the fabric, a physical reminder of how completely I had misunderstood everything. I backed away from the window, my legs shaky and unreliable. I stumbled to my car and sat behind the wheel, staring at the boutique where my sister was still standing in her beautiful dress, probably still talking about how pathetic I was to anyone who would listen. The worst part wasn't even the cruelty of her words, though they cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. The worst part was the casual nature of the conversation, the way she spoke about me like I was a joke that the whole family was in on. This wasn't a moment of wedding stress or temporary frustration. This was how my family really saw me, how they talked about me when I wasn't around. I pulled out my phone and looked at our text conversation from earlier that morning, where Rachel had sent me heart emojis and told me how excited she was for the fitting. The message that had made me feel so warm and included now seemed like evidence of her deception. Every "I love you" and "you're the best" was revealed as manipulation, strategic emotional management to keep the money flowing. The receipt from the bridal shop was sticking out of the cup holder where I'd thrown it weeks ago, evidence of another small upgrade that Rachel had charged to the wedding budget without asking. Looking at it now, I realized it wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about being seen as a person rather than a resource, about being valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. I sat in that car for 20 minutes, watching my sister through the window as she continued her phone conversation and enjoyed her fitting. She looked so happy, so carefree, so completely unburdened by any guilt about the way she was treating me. And that's when I realized that this wasn't going to change after the wedding. This was who she was, who they all were, and who they saw me as. I pulled the check out of my purse and stared at it. $80,000. 3 years of my life. Every sacrifice, every skipped vacation, every quiet evening at home instead of out with friends, all of it reduced to funding for people who saw me as pathetic and desperate. But as I sat there, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, something that felt like clarity. For the first time in years, I could see my family clearly, without the filter of my own desperate need for their approval. I started my car and drove away from the boutique, leaving Rachel to her fitting and her cruel conversation. I had a check to cancel and a life to reclaim. I drove home on autopilot, my mind reeling from what I'd heard at the bridal shop. The familiar route to my apartment blurred past as Rachel's words echoed in my head. Pathetic, desperate, her money's useful. Each repetition felt like another small cut, until I was emotionally bleeding from 1,000 tiny wounds. When I finally made it inside my apartment, I collapsed onto my couch and just sat there for what felt like hours. The check was still in my purse, that little piece of paper that represented so much more than money. It represented every choice I'd made for the past 3 years, every sacrifice, every moment I'd chosen family loyalty over my own well-being. I pulled out my laptop and opened my investment portfolio, staring at the numbers that had once filled me with such pride. The balance that had taken me years to build, that represented countless hours of research and discipline and delayed gratification. In a few days, I had planned to liquidate almost all of it for a sister who called me pathetic behind my back. The most devastating part was realizing how accurately Rachel had assessed my motivations. I had been trying to buy love and acceptance. I had been using my money as a way to feel important, valued, needed. Every generous gesture, every financial gift, every offer to help, they had all been transactions in my desperate attempt to secure a place in my family's affections. But understanding the truth about my motivations didn't make Rachel's cruelty any less painful. Even if I was guilty of trying to buy love, did that make me deserving of such casual contempt? Did my financial generosity really warrant being dismissed as boring and desperate? I thought about all the times I'd felt grateful when my family included me in their plans. All the moments when I'd felt special because they needed my help. How many of those interactions had been strategic on their part? How many conversations had they had about managing desperate Emma and her money? My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Where were you? We waited for you at the dress fitting. Everything looked perfect. Can't wait to show you the final look on the big day." The casual lie was almost worse than the cruelty I'd overheard. She knew I'd been planning to come to the fitting. She knew I'd taken time off work specifically to be there. But she was pretending like my absence was just a harmless miscommunication, like she hadn't spent the afternoon talking about how pathetic I was to anyone who would listen. I stared at the message for a long time, drafting and deleting responses. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to tell her exactly what I'd heard, and watch her scramble to explain herself. But another part of me was curious to see how far she would take the deception, how long she would continue manipulating me while thinking I was none the wiser. Instead of responding to her text, I opened my laptop and started researching. I pulled up my bank statements, my investment accounts, my credit card records, everything that showed the true scope of my financial situation. The numbers told a story that my family had never bothered to understand. I wasn't just someone with a little extra money to throw around. I was actually quite successful, quite capable, quite accomplished in my own right. My investment portfolio was more sophisticated than anything my parents had ever managed. My financial discipline was remarkable by any standard. My career trajectory was impressive, even if my family had never bothered to pay attention to it. For the first time in years, I looked at my life through my own eyes rather than through the lens of my family's judgment. I saw a woman who had built something substantial from almost nothing. I saw someone who was intelligent, disciplined, and capable of making difficult decisions. I saw someone who deserved better than to be treated as a walking ATM by people who claimed to love her. The revelation was both liberating and terrifying. If I wasn't going to fund Rachel's wedding, what did that mean for my relationship with my family? If I wasn't willing to buy their affection anymore, would they have any use for me at all? Was I prepared to find out how they really felt about me when money wasn't part of the equation? I thought about my grandmother, about the advice she'd given me when she left me that initial inheritance. She told me to be smart with money, but she'd also told me something else that I'd forgotten until this moment. Don't let anyone make you feel small for being smart, Emma. And don't let anyone convince you that your worth is measured by what you can give them. Grandma Helen had seen something in me that my parents had missed. Something that Rachel had dismissed as boring and pathetic. She'd seen strength, intelligence, independence, qualities that were apparently threatening to people who wanted to control and manipulate me. I pulled the check out of my purse again and held it up to the light. Such a small piece of paper to represent such a large chunk of my life. But it was just paper, just numbers. It wasn't a symbol of my love for my family. It was evidence of my willingness to accept crumbs of affection in exchange for substantial sacrifice. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Rachel. This one with photos from the fitting. She looked beautiful, radiant, completely happy. The kind of happiness that comes from having everything you want handed to you without consequence or gratitude. Isn't it perfect? The message read. I can't believe how amazing everything is going to be. You're the best sister ever for making this possible. The manipulation was so transparent now that I almost laughed. She was love-bombing me, trying to reinforce my emotional investment in her happiness, so I wouldn't question the financial investment she was expecting. But I was done being managed. I was done being manipulated. I was done accepting the scraps of affection that my family threw my way when they needed something from me. I looked at my investment portfolio one more time. At the carefully built wealth that represented my true accomplishments and my actual potential. This money wasn't going to buy me love from people who were incapable of seeing my worth. This money was going to buy me freedom from a family dynamic that had been slowly poisoning my sense of self for years. Tomorrow I would go to the bank. Tomorrow I would cancel the check and reclaim my financial future. Tomorrow I would start the process of building a life based on authentic relationships rather than purchased approval. Tonight I would grieve the family I thought I had so I could make room for the life I actually deserve. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Rachel's voice saying those awful words, saw the casual cruelty on her face as she dismissed my entire existence as pathetic and desperate. By 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and made coffee, sitting at my kitchen table with the check spread out in front of me like evidence in a criminal case. The bank didn't open until 9, which gave me 4 hours to second-guess myself, to imagine all the ways this decision could backfire, to consider whether I was making a terrible mistake. Part of me kept waiting for the anger to fade, for my usual people-pleasing instincts to kick in and convince me to forgive and forget. But every time I wavered, I remembered the laughter in Rachel's voice when she called me pathetic. I remembered the casual way she discussed using me, the complete absence that killed her affection in her tone. This wasn't a moment of stress or frustration. This was how my family really saw me when they thought I couldn't hear. And exactly 9 in life, I was standing outside First National Bank, waiting for them to unlock the door. I've been standing there for years, and the familiar environment made me feel comforting. Today it felt like the sitting for the most important decision of my adult life. Good morning, Miss Sinclair, said Jenna Patella, who usually handles my transactions. How can I help you today? I need to speak with the manager about canceling the cashier's check. I said my voice figured that I expected. Jerry's eyebrows rose slightly. Canceling cashier's check wasn't exactly a routine transaction. Let me get Mr. Peterson for you. He'll be able to help with that. Jacob Peterson has been my account manager for 3 years, ever since I started investing seriously. He was a soft-spoken man in his 50s, who had always treated my financial goals with respect, even when my account balances were much smaller than they were now. Okay, good to see you, he said, leading me into his office. Janet mentioned you need to cancel the cashier's check. That's unusual. Is there a problem? I handed him the check, watching his eyes widen slightly when he saw the amount. I need to cancel this and have the funds returned to my investment account. Of course we can do that, he said carefully. May I ask if there's been some kind of fraud or emergency? $80,000 is a substantial amount. I appreciated that he didn't quite beyond what was necessary for the transaction, but I found myself wanting to explain anyway. No, no. I was planning to give this to my sister for a wedding, but circumstances have changed. Mr. Peterson not a professional, but I thought a focus on something in simplicity in his expression, understanding, maybe a sympathy. Family's financial situation can be complicated, he said diplomatically. Let me process this cancellation, let's have a look. The next form he filled out, his signature is requested. I was severing the financial ties that had bound me to my family's expectations. There will be no going back from this decision. The funds will be returned to your investment account within 24 hours. Mr. Peterson explained. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at me. Hypothetically, if someone had been making regular withdrawals from this account to support family members, would that show up in any kind of credit analysis? His expression grew more serious. I did check the usual spending patterns, yes. Large frequent transfers to family members can sometimes indicate financial exploitation or abuse, especially when they represent a significant percentage of someone's assets. Financial abuse. The term is being called for. What would that look like exactly? Usually involves someone expected to influence themselves themselves, making them feel obligated to provide money to them, making them obligated to provide money to their financial goals. The victim often doesn't recognize it as abuse, because it's playing themselves the whole, like family using themselves. So would that be something the bank will take from credit now? The bank expected to customer will pay financial abuse, like credit and abuse, so you can send it out on the number, and it is better, and it is better, and it is Peterson leaned forward slightly. Financial values can be difficult to establish, especially with families, but your money is yours, Miss Buckmore. You won't harm a building portfolio, and you have every right to make decisions about how it feels, even if those decisions disappoint other people. The validation from a neutral third party was more meaningful than I'd expected. For months I've been questioning whether my concerns about the wedding expenses were selfish or unreasonable. Being a financial professional concerned that my situation showed signs of exploitation helped me trust my own instincts. Thank you. My exploitation left building my test and requesting out of the bank. I felt like I was a delighted and positive
all of them assuming my continued participation and financial support, none of them suspecting that everything had changed. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through downtown, past the coffee shops and restaurants where I used to deny myself small pleasures in service of my savings goals. For the first time in years, I stopped and bought myself an expensive latte, not because I needed it, but because I could afford it and I deserved it. Sitting in my car, sipping the perfectly crafted drink, I pulled out my phone and began composing the text message that would change everything. My finger hovered over the send button for a long moment, giving myself one last chance to reconsider. But Rachel's words echoed in my mind. Pathetic, desperate, her money's useful, the laughter when she called me boring, the casual dismissal of my entire existence. I pressed send. The text I sent was deliberately brief. Rachel, I need to talk to you about the wedding funding. Can you call me when you have a chance? I knew that message would create immediate panic. Rachel had become accustomed to my automatic approval of every expense, my cheerful acceptance of every budget increase. A request to talk about funding would signal that something had shifted, even if she couldn't imagine what. While I waited for her call, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my journal. The leather-bound book had been a gift from Grandma Helen, and I'd used it sporadically over the years to work through difficult emotions or major decisions. Today felt like exactly the right moment to put my thoughts down on paper. I heard Rachel call me pathetic today, I wrote. She said I was desperate and boring, that my money was the only useful thing about me. She laughed about how I was trying to buy love from a family that doesn't even want me at the wedding. Seeing the words written out in my own handwriting made them feel more real, more permanent. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of stress. This was the truth about how my family saw me, captured in black ink on white paper. I continued writing, letting all the hurt and anger flow out through my pen. But as I wrote, something interesting happened. The emotional pain began to transform into something else: clarity, determination, even a strange kind of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to rationalize or excuse my family's behavior. I was simply acknowledging it for what it was. I'd been enabling this, I wrote. Every time I gave them money without question, every time I accepted their dismissive treatment, every time I prioritized their needs over my own well-being, I was teaching them that I would tolerate being treated as less than human. I created this dynamic as much as they did. That realization was both painful and empowering. If I had helped create this situation, that meant I also had the power to change it. I wasn't a victim of circumstances beyond my control. I was someone who had been making choices, even if they were choices that hurt me. My phone rang. Rachel's name appeared on the screen and I could almost feel her anxiety through the device. I let it ring twice before answering, using those extra seconds to center myself. Emma, what's going on? Your text sounded weird. Her voice was artificially bright, the tone she used when she was trying to manage a situation she didn't understand. I recognized it now as the voice she'd probably been using with me for months, maybe years. I need to talk to you about the wedding budget, I said calmly. Can you come over tonight? Or would you prefer to meet somewhere else? Come over. Emma, what's wrong? Did something happen with the money? The wedding is in 2 weeks. We can't have any problems now. The panic in her voice was barely concealed. Not concern for me, not worry about our relationship, but fear about her wedding plans. Even in this moment, I was primarily valuable to her as a funding source. Nothing's wrong with the money, I said truthfully. But we need to have a conversation about expectations and boundaries. Tonight would be good. Boundaries. Emma, you're scaring me. What are you talking about? I almost felt sorry for her. She genuinely couldn't conceive of a world where I might have concerns or needs that didn't align perfectly with her desires. In her mind, I existed to support her dreams, and any deviation from that role was incomprehensible. Come over at 7, I said. We'll talk then. After I hung up, I spent the afternoon preparing for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I organized my thoughts, planned what I wanted to say, and mentally rehearsed responses to the various arguments and manipulations I expected Rachel to deploy. I also did something that felt almost ritualistic. I gathered up all the wedding-related materials I'd accumulated over the months. The venue brochures, the vendor contracts, the budget spreadsheets, the Pinterest boards I'd created with ideas for decorations. All of it represented my emotional investment in Rachel's happiness, my desperate desire to be important to her special day. I put everything in a box, ready to return to her that evening. Looking at the collection of papers and photos, I was struck by how much energy I'd poured into someone else's dream while neglecting my own life entirely. When was the last time I'd made plans for my own future with the same enthusiasm I'd shown for Rachel's wedding? As evening approached, I felt surprisingly calm. The decision was made, the check was canceled, and I had clarity about what needed to happen next. Rachel would be upset, my parents would be disappointed, and my family dynamics would probably never be the same. But for the first time in years, I was prioritizing my own well-being over their comfort. I changed into my most confident outfit, a navy blue dress that made me feel professional and put together.
I wanted to look like someone who made thoughtful decisions, not someone who could be easily manipulated or dismissed. I styled my hair carefully, and even put on lipstick, small acts of self-care that helped me feel stronger. At exactly 7 o'clock, Rachel knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I could see that she dressed carefully too, probably trying to look vulnerable and sympathetic. She was carrying a bottle of wine and had tears already forming in her eyes, her go-to strategy for difficult conversations. I took a deep breath, reminded myself of everything I'd written in my journal, and opened the door. Rachel rushed forward as if to hug me, but I stepped back slightly, maintaining physical distance that would help me maintain emotional boundaries. Emma, thank God you're okay. I was so worried when you sent that text. What's going on? How can I help? Even her opening words were strategic, positioning herself as the concerned sister, ready to rescue me from whatever problem I was facing. She had no idea that she was the problem, or that I was no longer interested in being rescued by people who saw me as pathetic and desperate. Come in, I said. Let's sit down and talk. Rachel settled onto my couch, setting down the wine and looking at me with what I now recognized as her concerned sister expression, eyebrows slightly furrowed, head tilted, voice soft and caring. It was a performance I'd seen countless times, but now I could see the calculation behind it. So what's going on? She asked. You've been acting strange since yesterday. Did something happen at work? Are you having money problems? The irony of her asking if I was having money problems while planning to spend my entire savings on her wedding wasn't lost on me. I pulled the box of wedding materials from beside my chair and set it on the coffee table between us. I won't be funding your wedding, Rachel, I said simply. I canceled the check this morning. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Rachel's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally a kind of panicked anger that she tried to mask with hurt. What? Emma, that's not funny. The wedding is in 2 weeks. We've already paid deposits, booked vendors. Everything is based on that money being available. I understand that, I said calmly, but the money isn't available anymore. It's been returned to my investment account. Rachel stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. This is insane. You can't just change your mind about something like this. We have contracts, commitments. People are depending on that money. People were depending on money that was never actually theirs, I replied. Money that I worked 3 years to save. Money that represented significant sacrifice on my part. She whirled around to face me, and I saw a flash of the real Rachel, not the sweet, grateful sister, but someone who was genuinely angry at being denied something she felt entitled to. Emma, what the hell is wrong with you? This is my wedding. This is the most important day of my life, and you're just going to destroy it because what? Because you're having some kind of breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown, I said evenly. I'm making a rational decision based on new information about how you really feel about me. Something in my tone must have warned her, because her expression shifted slightly. The anger was still there, but underneath it I could see the beginning of real fear. What are you talking about, Emma? I love you. You're my sister. I don't understand what's happening here. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opening the voice memo app. I'd been recording our conversation since she walked in, not to use against her, but to make sure I didn't let myself be gaslit into forgetting what was actually said. Yesterday afternoon I came to your dress fitting, I said. I was planning to surprise you with the check, to make it a special moment, but when I got there you were on the phone. The color drained from Rachel's face. She knew exactly what conversation I was referring to, and she knew I'd heard it. Emma, whatever you think you heard. I heard you call me pathetic, I said quietly. I heard you say I was desperate and boring, that I was trying to buy love from a family that doesn't even want me at the wedding. I heard you laugh about how my money was the only useful thing about me. Rachel sank back onto the couch, her hands shaking slightly. For the first time in our entire conversation, her mask slipped completely, and I could see genuine fear in her eyes. You weren't supposed to hear that, she whispered. No, I wasn't, I agreed, but I did, and now I know how you really feel about me, how the whole family really feels about me. Tears started flowing down Rachel's cheeks, but they looked different from her usual strategic crying. These seemed real, born from panic, rather than manipulation. Emma, please, you have to understand, I was just venting. I was stressed about the wedding, and I said things I didn't mean. You know how I get when I'm overwhelmed. You called me pathetic and boring, I repeated. You said my money was useful, but you didn't want me at your wedding. Which part of that was just stress talking? Rachel was crying harder now, mascara running down her cheeks. All of it. I was being horrible, I know that, but I love you, Emma. You're my sister. I would never hurt you on purpose, but you did hurt me on purpose, I said. Maybe not by letting me overhear that conversation, but by taking my money while thinking so little of me. by letting me believe I was contributing to something meaningful, when you saw it as just another way to manage your pathetic, desperate sister. Please, Rachel begged, please don't do this. The wedding is everything to me. I'll make it up to you, I promise. I'll be a better sister. I'll include you more. You'll what? I interrupted. You'll pretend to value me as long as I keep paying for things? You'll fake affection as long as I'm useful. She was sobbing openly now, her carefully applied makeup completely ruined. Emma, I'm so sorry. I know I said terrible things, but I was wrong. You're not pathetic or desperate. You're generous and loving. And stop, I said firmly. Don't try to manage me anymore, Rachel. I heard what you really think, and I believe you. The person you were on that phone call, that's who you actually are. This person, the one begging for forgiveness, this is just another performance. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, needing some physical distance from her emotional manipulation. When I came back with a glass of water, she was holding her phone. I'm calling Mom, she said desperately. She'll talk sense into you. She'll explain. Go ahead, I said. Call everyone. Tell them exactly what happened. Tell them I overheard you laughing about how pathetic I am, and now I'm not funding your wedding anymore. Rachel's finger hovered over her phone screen, and I could see her mind racing. She was probably realizing that calling our parents would require explaining why I'd withdrawn my financial support, which would mean admitting to the conversation I'd overheard. This is going to ruin everything, she whispered. It's going to ruin your wedding plans, I corrected. But maybe this is exactly what needed to happen. Maybe we both needed to stop pretending that our relationship was something it wasn't. I handed her the box of wedding materials. These are yours. All the research I did, all the planning documents, all the vendor information. You'll need to figure out how to make it work within your actual budget. Rachel took the box with trembling hands, staring down at it like it contained evidence of a crime. In a way it did. Evidence of how completely I'd invested myself in her happiness while she saw me as nothing more than a funding source. Emma, please, she said one more time. There has to be a way to fix this. There is, I said. You can learn to see me as a person instead of an ATM. You can develop genuine affection for me instead of strategic appreciation. You can build a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial exploitation. But the wedding will happen or it won't, I finished. But it won't happen with my money. That part of our relationship is over. Rachel stood up slowly, clutching the box to her chest. She looked younger suddenly, less polished, more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. I never meant for it to be like this, she said quietly. I believe that, I replied, but intent doesn't erase impact. And the impact of your words, of this whole dynamic, has been devastating for me. She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. What happens now? Now you figure out how to have a wedding you can actually afford, I said. And I figure out how to have a family relationship that doesn't require me to buy my way into it. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, feeling strangely empty. The hardest part was over, but I knew the real consequences were just beginning. My phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. Mom's contact photo filled the screen, and I could practically feel her fury radiating through the device. I let it go to voicemail, then watched as 3 more calls came in rapid succession. Dad, David, Rachel again. The voicemail from Mom was exactly what I'd expected. Emma Rose Sinclair, you call me back this instant. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this nonsense stops right now. Your sister is hysterical, and we need to fix this family emergency immediately. Family emergency, not we need to understand what happened, or we're concerned about you, just a problem that needed fixing, presumably by me backing down and resuming my role as the family bank. I made coffee and waited. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing constantly with a group text chain that I hadn't even known existed. Apparently, my family had a group chat called Family Updates that included everyone except me. Now they'd added me probably so they could coordinate their response to my rebellion. David, Emma, what the hell? Rachel's wedding is in 13 days. Mom, this is completely unacceptable. We raised you better than this. Dad, call your mother. We need to talk about this like adults. Rachel, I tried to explain, but she won't listen to reason. Mom, Emma, you're being selfish and cruel. How could you do this to your sister? David, can't believe you'd destroy her wedding over some stupid argument. Rachel, it wasn't even a real argument. She's having some kind of breakdown. The messages kept coming, each one more accusatory than the last. I watched the thread for 20 minutes, fascinated by how quickly they'd closed ranks and decided I was the villain in this story. Nobody asked what had prompted my decision. Nobody expressed concern for my well-being. Nobody even seemed curious about my perspective.
Finally, I typed a response. I'm not having a breakdown. I overheard Rachel's phone conversation at the bridal shop, where she called me pathetic and desperate, and said my money was the only useful thing about me. I decided not to fund a wedding for someone who has such contempt for me. The group chat went silent for exactly 4 minutes. Then the explosion began. Rachel, that's not what I meant and you know it. Mom, even if she said something hurtful, that doesn't justify destroying her wedding. Dad, words said in stress don't count. Actions do. And your actions are hurting the whole family. David, Jesus, Emma, be the bigger person here. Mom, you've always been too sensitive. Rachel loves you. We all love you. Dad, love means sacrifice. It means putting family first even when it's hard. Rachel, I already apologized. I said I was sorry. What more do you want from me? The gaslighting was so systematic, so coordinated, that I wondered if they'd planned these responses. Every message was designed to minimize Rachel's words, while maximizing my responsibility to overlook them. My feelings didn't matter. My financial boundaries didn't matter. Only Rachel's wedding mattered. I screenshot the entire conversation and saved it to my phone. I wanted evidence of this moment, proof of how my family responded when I finally stood up for myself. Then I typed my final message to the group. A real apology includes changing behavior, not just saying sorry while expecting everything to continue as before. Rachel can have whatever wedding she can afford with her own money. I'm removing myself from this chat. I left the group and blocked all their numbers for 24 hours. I needed space to think without the constant barrage of manipulation and guilt, but they found other ways to reach me. My work email received a message from Dad, formal and cold. Emma, your mother and I are deeply disappointed in your behavior. We raised you to be a loving, supportive family member, and this selfishness is completely out of character. Please reconsider your decision before you permanently damage your relationships with people who love you. The email felt like a corporate reprimand from a boss, not a communication from a parent. There was no warmth, no attempt to understand my perspective, no acknowledgement that I might have legitimate reasons for my decision. Mom tried a different approach, sending flowers to my office with a card that read, "Sweetheart, families work through their problems together. Please come home for dinner Sunday so we can talk about this misunderstanding. Love, Mom." The flowers were beautiful, expensive, and completely calculated. She was trying to make me feel guilty for causing family drama while simultaneously demonstrating that money wasn't really an issue. They just expected me to be the one providing it. The most painful message came from David, who called my work phone directly. "Emma, it's me. Look, I know you're upset, but you're being ridiculous. Rachel's always been dramatic. You know that, but she's also your sister and she's getting married once. You can't seriously destroy her wedding because she said some stupid stuff when she was stressed. Did you know about the family group chat that I wasn't included in?" I asked. "What? I mean, yeah, we have a family chat. It's just for coordinating stuff. Don't make this about that. David, do you think I'm pathetic and desperate?" He paused. "What? No, of course not. You're my sister. But when Rachel said those things about me, were you surprised? Or did they sound familiar?" Another pause, longer this time. "Emma, you're overthinking this. Rachel was just venting. People say stuff they don't mean when they're overwhelmed. That's not an answer to my question. Look, maybe you are a little, I don't know, maybe you try too hard sometimes, but that doesn't make you pathetic. It just makes you Emma. Try too hard. Even my brother, who was supposedly defending me, couldn't resist pointing out my flaws." The conversation crystallized something I'd been realizing gradually. This wasn't just about Rachel's cruelty. This was about a family dynamic, where I'd been cast as the overeager, slightly desperate sister, whose primary value was her willingness to sacrifice for everyone else. "I'm not changing my mind," I told David, "and I need you all to stop trying to manipulate me into changing it. Nobody's manipulating you, Emma. We're trying to save you from making a huge mistake." After I hung up, I sat in my office staring out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Rachel was probably calling vendors, trying to figure out how to scale back her wedding plans. My parents were probably strategizing about how to pressure me into backing down. David was probably shaking his head about his stubborn, oversensitive sister, and for the first time in years, I didn't care what any of them thought about me. My assistant knocked on on my door. Emma, your sister's here to see you. Should I send her up? I looked down at the parking lot and saw Rachel's car, confirming that she'd driven to my workplace to continue the pressure campaign. She was escalating, bringing our family drama into my professional space. Please tell her I'm in meetings all day, I said, and if she comes back, building security should escort her out. It felt harsh, but I was learning that establishing boundaries required being willing to enforce them, even when it felt uncomfortable. Especially when it felt uncomfortable. My phone buzzed with yet another text from an unknown number, probably mom using someone else's phone to get around my temporary blocks. But this time the message surprised me. Emma, this is your cousin Sarah. I heard about what's happening with Rachel's wedding. I wanted you to know that some of us think you're doing the right thing. Can we talk sometime? There are things about our family that you should probably know. I stared at the message for a long time. Sarah was my dad's sister's daughter, someone I'd only seen at major family events. We'd never been particularly close, but her message suggested she had information that might help me understand the broader pattern I was beginning to recognize. For the first time since this whole crisis began, I felt like I might not be completely alone.
I called Sarah that evening, my hand shaking slightly as I dialed her number. Something about her message had suggested she knew more about my family dynamics than I'd ever realized, and I was both desperate for allies and terrified of what I might learn. Emma, thank God you called, Sarah said immediately. I'd been watching this whole wedding drama unfold from the sidelines, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You need to know some things about your family that nobody's ever told you. We agreed to meet for coffee the next day at a quiet cafe across town, somewhere we wouldn't risk running into any other family members. I spent the night wondering what secrets Sarah might reveal, what patterns I'd missed, what context might explain the way I'd been treated for so many years. Sarah was already waiting when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee and a manila envelope that looked stuffed with papers. She stood to hug me, and I was surprised by how genuinely warm and concerned she seemed. First, I want you to know that what you did took incredible courage, she said as we sat down. Standing up to your family's financial manipulation isn't easy, especially when they're so good at making you feel guilty for having boundaries. Financial manipulation, I repeated. That's the second time someone's used that phrase to describe my situation. Sarah nodded grimly. It's exactly what it is, Emma, and it's not new. It's a pattern that goes back generations in your family. She opened the envelope and pulled out what looked like letters, documents, and old photographs. This is correspondence between me and your great-aunt Margaret, your grandmother Helen's sister. She moved to Oregon in the 1970s specifically to get away from your family's financial toxicity. I stared at the papers, not understanding. Aunt Margaret? I barely remember her. She only came to a few family gatherings when I was little. That's because your parents essentially cut her off when she refused to keep funding your grandfather's business failures, Sarah explained. Margaret was the family's success story. She became a nurse, invested wisely, built a comfortable life for herself. And your grandparents, and later your parents, saw her as their personal bank account. She handed me a letter dated 15 years ago, written in careful cursive handwriting. Dear Sarah, I read aloud. I'm writing to warn you about the pattern I see developing with Emma. She's such a bright, capable girl, but I watch the family treat her the same way they treated me, as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be loved. Please keep an eye on her. She's going to need someone who understands what this kind of manipulation can do to a person's sense of self-worth. My hands were trembling as I read. Aunt Margaret had seen what was happening to me when I was still a teenager, before I'd even started making serious money. She tried to intervene a few times, Sarah continued. She offered to help pay for your college directly, bypassing your parents, but they shut her down. They said you didn't need outside interference, that the family would take care of you. I never knew about any of this, I whispered. Sarah pulled out more documents, bank records, letters, even some old photographs. Margaret documented everything because she'd been through it herself. Look at this. She showed me a photo from the 1960s showing a group of people at what looked like a family picnic. Margaret was there, young and smiling, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. That's Margaret with her fiancé, Robert. They were planning to get married in 1968, but your grandfather convinced Margaret to loan him the money she'd saved for her wedding to invest in some business scheme. The business failed. The money was gone, and Robert left because he realized he'd never be able to compete with her family's financial demands. The parallel to my own situation was so obvious it took my breath away. She never married. She did eventually, but much later, and only after she'd moved away and established firm boundaries. She said the only way to have healthy relationships was to remove herself from the family's sphere of influence. Sarah handed me another letter, this one more recent. This is from last year, about 6 months before Margaret passed away. She was worried about you. I read the letter with growing amazement.
Margaret had been following my life from a distance, somehow aware of my financial success and my family's increasing demands. She'd even predicted that they would try to use a major life event like a wedding to extract as much money as possible from me. She wanted to contact you directly, Sarah said, but she was afraid your parents would find out and cut you off from her completely. She thought it was better to work through me, to be ready to help you when you finally realized what was happening. Why didn't you say something sooner? I asked. Sarah looked uncomfortable. Because Margaret made me promise to wait until you figured it out yourself. She said that people who are being financially manipulated have to come to their own realization. If someone else tries to convince them, they just dig in deeper and defend their abusers. I thought about all the times over the years when I'd felt uneasy about my family's treatment, but had talked myself out of those feelings. Margaret had been right. I wouldn't have believed any of this if I hadn't overheard Rachel's phone conversation myself. There's more, Sarah said gently. Margaret left something for you in her will. Your parents never told you about it because they were hoping you'd never find out. She handed me a legal document, a copy of Margaret's will, showing that she'd left me $50,000 and a letter. The money had been held in trust, waiting for me to claim it. She left instructions that you should only receive this inheritance when you demonstrated that you understood the family pattern and were ready to break free from it. Her lawyer has been waiting for someone to contact him on your behalf. I stared at the document, overwhelmed by the realization that someone had been looking out for me, preparing for this moment, understanding what I would need when I finally found the courage to stand up for myself. Margaret also left detailed instructions about how to handle the family backlash, Sarah continued. She knew they'd try to guilt you, manipulate you, maybe even threaten you. She wanted you to know that you're not the first person to escape this pattern, and you won't be the last. She pulled out one final item, a thick folder labeled Family Financial History. Margaret documented decades of this behavior. Your great-grandfather did it to his children, your grandfather did it to his siblings, your parents did it to Margaret, and are now doing it to you. It's a generational pattern of identifying the most successful family member and systematically exploiting their generosity until they either submit completely or break away entirely. I opened the folder and saw page after page of documentation, loan requests that were never repaid, guilt trips about family loyalty, strategic emotional manipulation to keep the money flowing. The tactics were identical to what I'd experienced, just applied to different people across different decades. Rachel isn't really the problem, Sarah said quietly. She's just the latest tool your parents are using to extract money from you. If it wasn't her wedding, it would be something else. A medical emergency, a business opportunity, a family crisis that only your money could solve. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like I truly understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't about Rachel's wedding or even about Rachel's cruelty. This was about a systematic pattern of financial abuse that had been passed down through generations, like a twisted family legacy. What happened to the other people who tried to break away, I asked. Sarah smiled sadly. Some of them, like Margaret, had to cut contact completely. Others found ways to maintain relationships but with strict financial boundaries. A few tried to go back to the old dynamic and regretted it for the rest of their lives. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. But you don't have to figure this out alone, Emma. Margaret made sure of that. You have resources, you have support, and most importantly, you have the truth about what's really happening. I left that cafe with Margaret's inheritance paperwork, her documentation of the family pattern, and most importantly, her letter, a message of encouragement and validation from someone who had walked this path before me and wanted to make sure I didn't have to walk it alone. 10 days before Rachel's wedding, I received an envelope in my mailbox that made my stomach drop. Inside was my original wedding invitation, the elegant, expensive cardstock that Rachel had spent weeks agonizing over, but my name had been crossed out with thick black marker. Below it, someone had written in angry handwriting, "Since you don't care about family, don't bother coming." The invitation felt like a physical manifestation of everything that had happened over the past few weeks. I was being officially uninvited from an event that I had been expected to fund. The symbolism was so perfect it was almost funny. My money was welcome, but I was not. I called Sarah, who had become my primary source of emotional support through this ordeal. "They're trying to punish you," she said matter-of-factly. Margaret's notes describe this exact tactic. When the family target starts establishing boundaries, they escalate to exclusion and public shaming. They want you to feel so desperate to belong that you'll do anything to get back in their good graces. "It's working," I admitted. "Seeing my name crossed out like that, it hurts more than I expected." "Of course it does," Sarah said gently. "You're human, and these are people you love. But remember what Margaret wrote. The pain of exclusion is temporary. The damage of continued exploitation is permanent." Over the next few days, I watched from a distance as Rachel's wedding plans imploded. Through mutual friends and social media, I learned that the Riverside Manor had been canceled when the remaining deposit couldn't be covered. The expensive photographer had been replaced with someone much cheaper. The elaborate floral arrangements had been scaled down dramatically. Part of me felt genuinely sad for Rachel. Whatever her flaws, she had dreamed of a beautiful wedding, and watching those dreams get downsized because of financial reality was painful. But I also recognized that this was exactly what should have happened from the beginning. A couple planning a wedding they could actually afford with their own resources. My mother made one final attempt at reconciliation, showing up at my apartment with tears in her eyes and a story about how heartbroken Rachel was. "She's barely eating," Mom said, standing in my doorway like a refugee from a disaster. "She spends all day crying about how her wedding is ruined." "Emma, please, she's your baby sister. Don't let some silly argument destroy the most important day of her life." "It wasn't a silly argument," I said calmly. "It was a revelation about how my family really sees me." "We love you," Mom insisted. "You know we love you." "Do you?" I asked. "Because when I established a boundary about my money, your immediate response was to exclude me from family events. That doesn't feel like love to me." Mom's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw genuine distress rather than strategic manipulation. "We don't know how to fix this, Emma. We don't understand what you want from us. I want to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide," I said. "I want my feelings to matter as much as Rachel's. I want to have relationships that don't revolve around money. But families help each other," Mom said desperately. "That's what love looks like. Sacrifice, generosity, putting others first." "One-way sacrifice isn't love," I replied. "It's exploitation, and I'm done being exploited, even by people who claim to love me." After she left, I realized that my mother genuinely didn't understand the difference between healthy family support and financial manipulation. In her mind, my refusal to fund Rachel's wedding was a betrayal of family values, not a legitimate boundary. She couldn't see that asking someone to sacrifice their entire savings for another person's luxury event was inappropriate. The most painful part of the whole situation was watching my extended family choose sides. Some relatives who had always been friendly suddenly became cold and distant. Others made pointed comments about family loyalty and disappointment. I was being quietly excommunicated from the family social network, one relationship at a time, but there were also surprises. My cousin Mark, who I'd always seen as firmly in my parents' camp, sent me a private message. "Hey Em, I don't know all the details about what's happening with Rachel's wedding, but I wanted you to know that I think you're brave for standing up for yourself. Our family has some weird dynamics around money, and somebody needed to call it out." A few other relatives reached out privately to express support, though none of them were willing to say anything publicly. The family's financial manipulation apparently wasn't a secret, it was just something everyone tolerated and enabled. 3 days before the wedding, I ran into Marcus at the grocery store. Rachel's fiancé looked exhausted, stressed, and genuinely relieved to see me. "Emma," he said, approaching cautiously, "I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to me." "Of course I'll talk to you," I said. "None of this is your fault." He looked around nervously, as if Rachel might appear from behind the produce section. "I need you to know that I never wanted you to pay for our wedding. When Rachel first mentioned that you were contributing, I told her it was too much to ask, but she said you'd offered, that you wanted to help." "I did offer," I admitted. "I wanted Rachel to have her dream wedding. I feel terrible about what happened," Marcus continued. "I was there during that phone call at the dress shop. I told Rachel she was being cruel, but she said you wouldn't understand her sense of humor." The phrase sense of humor made my stomach turn. Even now Rachel was characterizing her cruelty as a joke that I was too sensitive to appreciate. "Are you still planning to marry her?" I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I love her," he said finally, "but these past few weeks have shown me a side of her that I didn't know existed. The way she's talked about you, the way your whole family has treated this situation, it's made me question some things." I felt sorry for him. He was seeing his fiancé's true character just days before their wedding, realizing that the woman he'd fallen in love with was capable of casual cruelty toward her own sister. "Whatever you decide," I said, "make sure you're making the choice based on who she really is, not who you hope she could become." As I drove home, I thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. I'd lost my family, at least temporarily, but I'd gained something valuable, clarity about who I really was, and what I deserved from the people in my life. The wedding was happening in 3 days, without my money, and without my presence. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt genuinely at peace with both of those facts. The weeks following my confrontation with Rachel felt like emerging from a fog I hadn't even realized I'd been living in. With the $80,000 no longer earmarked for someone else's dream, I found myself asking a question I hadn't considered in years. What did I actually want to do with my life and my money? The first decision I made was about charity. I'd always believed in giving back, but I'd never had the resources to make meaningful contributions. Now I did, and I wanted to use some of Rachel's former wedding fund for causes that actually mattered to me. I
researched organizations that provided financial literacy education to young women, particularly those from low-income backgrounds. The parallels to my own situation weren't lost on me. These were people who needed to understand money and boundaries to protect themselves from exploitation. I made substantial donations to 3 different programs, each contribution accompanied by a personal note explaining why their work mattered to me. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Program directors called to thank me personally, explaining how my donations would expand their reach and impact. One organization sent me a photo of a workshop in session, with a note that read, "Emma, because of your generosity, these 15 young women will learn investment strategies that could change their entire financial futures. Thank you for believing in their potential." It was the first time in years that my money had generated genuine gratitude rather than expectation and entitlement. These organizations saw my contribution as transformative, not as an obligation or starting point for future demands. But the real surprise came when one of the program directors, Maria Santos, called to ask if I'd be interested in volunteering as a workshop facilitator. "Emma, your background in investment management is exactly what our participants need to hear about," she said. "Would you consider teaching a monthly workshop on building wealth from small amounts?" I said yes immediately, and that decision changed everything. Teaching those workshops became the highlight of each month. Working with teenagers who were hungry to learn about financial independence reminded me why I'd fallen in love with investing in the first place. These young people appreciated knowledge that my family had always taken for granted.
The hardest lesson, Janet said, was realizing that some people love the idea of your success more than they love you as a person. Once I started saying no to family financial requests, I discovered which relationships were real and which were transactional. Janet introduced me to her book club, a group of professional women who met monthly to discuss everything from career challenges to personal growth. I'd forgotten how energizing it could be to have conversations that didn't revolve around managing other people's needs and emotions. The book club included Dr. Lisa Chen, a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. When she learned about my situation, she offered insights that helped me understand the psychological aspects of what I'd experienced. Financial enmeshment often develops gradually, she explained during one of our conversations. Families normalize the pattern of one person providing financial support until it becomes an expectation rather than a gift. Breaking that cycle feels like betrayal to them, but it's actually healthy differentiation. Through Lisa, I learned terms like emotional manipulation and financial codependency that gave me language for experiences I'd never been able to name. Understanding the psychology behind my family's behavior helped me feel less guilty about maintaining my boundaries. My professional life began flourishing in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant stress of managing family financial crises, I had more energy to focus on my career. I started volunteering for high-profile projects, networking with colleagues I'd previously been too distracted to engage with properly. My supervisor, Karen, noticed the change immediately. "Emma, something's different about you lately. You seem more confident, more engaged. Have you thought about applying for the senior analyst position that's opening up?" I hadn't considered it, but the idea immediately excited me. The position would mean a significant salary increase and the opportunity to work on more complex, interesting projects. For years, I'd been so focused on accumulating money for family emergencies that I'd neglected my own professional development. Dating became possible again for the first time in years. I'd essentially stopped meeting new people when every spare dollar was being saved for Rachel's wedding fund. Now I joined a weekend hiking group, rediscovering my love for outdoor activities I'd abandoned in my quest to maximize savings. On one of these hikes, I met Tom, a 30-year-old software engineer who was refreshingly straightforward. He paid for his own coffee, split dinner bills without being asked, and never seemed to expect anything from me beyond enjoying each other's company. After years of relationships defined by financial expectations, his independence was incredibly attractive. "You seem like someone who's figuring some important things out," he said after our third date when I'd been unusually quiet during dinner. "I'm learning to have relationships that aren't based on what I can provide for other people," I admitted. "That sounds exhausting," he said simply. "Good for you for stopping." His matter-of-fact support of my boundary setting was such a contrast to my family's manipulation that it almost brought me to tears. Here was someone who saw my self-respect as healthy rather than selfish. As Rachel's wedding weekend approached, I found myself genuinely busy with activities and relationships that brought me joy. I had volunteering commitments, social plans with new friends, and a growing sense that my life was expanding in directions I'd never allowed myself to explore. The thank you cards from the organizations I'd supported were displayed on my refrigerator, tangible reminders that my money could create positive change rather than just purchase temporary family approval. Each card represented young people who were learning skills that would help them build independent, financially secure lives. I also started therapy with Dr. Chen, wanting to understand my own patterns and make sure I didn't repeat them in future relationships. Those sessions helped me recognize how deeply I'd internalized the belief that my worth was tied to my usefulness to others. "Emma,
Dr. Chen said during one particularly breakthrough session, "You've spent years trying to earn love through financial sacrifice, but love that has to be purchased isn't really love at all. It's a transaction and you deserve so much better than that." For the first time since the wedding crisis began, I felt genuinely excited about my future. I was building relationships based on mutual respect, pursuing goals that aligned with my values, and using my resources in ways that created lasting positive impact rather than temporary family peace. The family drama that had seemed so overwhelming just weeks earlier was starting to feel like background noise to a life that was finally becoming authentically mine. Rachel's wedding day arrived on a crisp Saturday in November, and I woke up feeling surprisingly peaceful. Instead of the elaborate day at Riverside Manor that we'd originally planned, the ceremony was being held at a local community center with a reception in the attached hall. I learned these details not from my family but from social media posts and conversations with mutual friends. I had made plans to spend the day volunteering at a financial literacy workshop for teenagers, followed by dinner with Janet and some friends from the book club. It felt good to have a full, meaningful day planned that had nothing to do with my family's drama. The morning workshop went wonderfully. I worked with a group of 16-year-olds who were learning about compound interest and investment basics, and their enthusiasm reminded me why I'd started volunteering in the first place. These kids were hungry for knowledge that could help them build better futures, and they appreciated my expertise in ways my family never had. Ms. Emma, one of the students, said during a break, "My mom says investing is only for rich people, but you're showing us how to start with just $20 a month. That's amazing." Moments like that reinforced my decision to redirect my money toward causes that created real impact rather than funding other people's luxury experiences. Around noon, I started receiving messages from friends who were at Rachel's wedding. Most were carefully neutral, obviously trying not to take sides in family drama they didn't fully understand, but a few offered insights into how the scaled-down event was going. My college friend Jessica texted, "Wedding is lovely but definitely more modest than what Rachel was originally planning. She seems happy though. Sorry you're not here." Another friend, Mike, was more direct. "Groom looks stressed. Bride kept making comments about budget constraints. Whole family seems tense. You didn't miss much." But the most revealing message came from Marcus's sister, who I'd met a few times during the engagement period. "Emma, I know this is awkward, but I wanted you to know that Marcus has been really struggling with all this family drama. He keeps saying he wishes you were here, and that none of this had to happen." I felt genuinely sorry for Marcus. He'd gotten caught in the middle of my family's dysfunction through no fault of his own, and his wedding day was probably being overshadowed by the tension and financial stress that my absence had created. Around 3 o'clock, Sarah called me with updates. She'd attended the wedding, partly to support Rachel but mostly to observe how the family was handling the situation. "It's complicated," she said carefully. "The ceremony was beautiful actually. Rachel looked gorgeous, and they clearly love each other. But there's definitely an elephant in the room. Your parents look exhausted, and there's been a lot of whispering about finances and family drama. How is Rachel handling it?" I asked. "She's putting on a good show, but I can tell she's struggling." She made a few pointed comments during her reception speech about family members who choose to hold grudges during important moments. It was pretty obviously directed at you. I wasn't surprised. Even on her wedding day, Rachel couldn't resist positioning herself as the victim of my selfishness, rather than acknowledging her role in creating this situation. "The interesting thing," Sarah continued, "is how some of the other relatives are reacting. I've had 3 separate conversations with cousins and aunts, who quietly told me they think you did the right thing. A lot of people have apparently been uncomfortable with the family's financial dynamics for years, but nobody wanted to say anything." That evening, during dinner with my new friends, I found myself telling them about the wedding I wasn't attending, and the family crisis that had led to my absence. Their responses were so different from what I'd been hearing from my family, that it felt like stepping into an alternate universe. "Wait," said Tom, who had joined us for dinner, "your sister called you pathetic for offering to pay for her wedding, and then your family got mad at you for not paying anyway. That's insane." "Emma, you do realize that most people pay for their own weddings, right?" added Lisa from book club, "like with their own money that they saved up. The idea that a sibling should fund an entire wedding is completely unreasonable." Janet nodded emphatically. "I've been to dozens of weddings, and I've never once heard of someone expecting their sister to pay for the whole thing. That's not normal family support, that's financial exploitation." Their perspective was so clear, so unambiguous, that I wondered how I'd ever convinced myself that my family's expectations were reasonable. These people, who had no agenda other than wanting me to be happy and healthy, could immediately see what I'd taken years to recognize. Around 9 o'clock, I started seeing social media posts from the wedding reception. The photos showed a modest but lovely celebration: simple flowers, basic catering, a small band instead of the elaborate entertainment Rachel had originally planned. Everyone looked happy enough, though I could detect strain in some of the smiles if I looked closely. The most painful posts came from my parents, who had clearly coordinated their social media to emphasize family unity and celebration, while pointedly excluding any mention of me. Dad posted a photo of himself dancing with Rachel with the caption, "So proud of our beautiful daughter on her special day. Family is everything." Mom shared multiple photos with captions about love, joy, and the people who matter most. The subtext was clear. I had chosen not to be part of this celebration, and they were moving on without me. But as I looked at those photos, I realized something important. I didn't actually want to be there. Not because I didn't love Rachel or wish her happiness, but because I didn't want to be part of a celebration where my value was measured by my financial contribution rather than my presence as a person. The wedding that was happening without me was probably the wedding Rachel and Marcus should have planned from the beginning, a celebration they could afford, surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to be there. My absence had forced them to create something authentic, rather than something funded by guilt and manipulation. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day, from Marcus himself. Emma, I know this is complicated, but I want you to know that I wish things had been different. Rachel is my wife now and I love her, but I hope someday we can all find a way to heal this family rift. You deserve better than what happened. His message was gracious and kind, and it gave me hope that maybe eventually some relationships could be rebuilt on healthier foundations. But I also knew that any reconciliation would have to involve genuine change from my family, not just my willingness to go back to the old patterns. As I got ready for bed that night, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Rachel was married, the crisis was over, and I had successfully maintained my boundaries even under intense pressure. I'd chosen my own well-being over family expectations, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it was just beginning. 3 months after Rachel's wedding, I signed the lease on a new apartment. It was larger than my old place in a better neighborhood, with floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with natural light. For the first time in my adult life, I was making housing decisions based on what I wanted, rather than what I could afford while maintaining maximum savings for other people's emergencies. The apartment hunt had been surprisingly emotional. As I looked at different places, I realized I'd been living like someone who was just passing through her own life, saving money for other people's dreams while denying myself basic comforts. My old apartment had been fine, small, adequate, cheap, but it had never felt like home. It had felt like a temporary space where I stored my belongings while I waited for my real life to begin. Now, as I arranged furniture I'd actually chosen rather than inherited or bought secondhand, I felt like I was finally claiming space for myself in the world. The lease signing was symbolic in ways I hadn't expected. When the landlord handed me the keys, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. This was my space, paid for with my money, chosen according to my preferences. No one could take it away from me or make me feel guilty for having it. My career had also taken a significant turn for the better. I'd gotten the promotion to senior analyst, which came with a substantial salary increase and the opportunity to work on more complex projects. My new role involved consulting with small businesses about their investment strategies, and I discovered that I loved helping entrepreneurs build financial foundations for their dreams. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now professionally helping other people achieve financial goals, but on terms that were completely different from my family dynamic. These were business relationships based on mutual respect and fair compensation. My expertise was valued and compensated appropriately, not simply extracted through guilt and manipulation. Karen, my supervisor, had become something of a mentor. During one of our quarterly reviews, she made an observation that struck me as particularly insightful. Emma, I don't know what changed for you over the past few months, but your confidence level has transformed completely. You're presenting ideas more boldly, taking on leadership roles, and your client interactions have become much more authoritative. It's like you finally understand how good you are at this. She was right. Removing myself from my family's financial drama had freed up mental and emotional energy that I'd been pouring into managing their expectations and my own guilt. Without that constant drain, I could focus on developing my professional skills and pursuing opportunities that genuinely excited me. One of those opportunities was speaking at financial literacy conferences. My volunteer work with teenagers had led to invitations to present workshops for other organizations, and I discovered that I loved teaching. There was something deeply satisfying about helping people understand concepts that could genuinely improve their lives. During one particularly memorable presentation, a young woman approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. My family has been pressuring me to co-sign loans and give them money ever since I got my first real job, she said. I felt so guilty for wanting to save for my own future. Your talk about financial boundaries, it made me realize I'm not selfish for wanting to build my own security first. Conversations like that reminded me why establishing my own boundaries had been so important. I couldn't help other people develop healthy financial relationships if I hadn't figured out how to have them myself. My personal relationships continued to evolve as well. Tom and I had been dating for several months, and I was constantly amazed by how uncomplicated it felt to be with someone who didn't see me as a resource to be managed. He had his own career, his own goals, his own financial stability.
We supported each other emotionally, but neither of us expected the other to solve our problems or fund our dreams. You know what I love about you, he said one evening as we cooked dinner together in my new kitchen. You're so genuinely generous with your time and attention, but you're also completely clear about your boundaries. It's refreshing to be with someone who knows her own worth. The book club had become one of my favorite parts of each month. These women had watched me navigate the family crisis and emerge stronger, and they'd offered support without judgment or advice unless I asked for it. We'd moved beyond just discussing books to sharing our personal challenges and celebrating each other's victories. Janet had become a particularly close friend. She'd gone through her own process of establishing financial boundaries with family members, and she understood the complex emotions involved in choosing your own well-being over family expectations. The hardest part, she said during one of our coffee dates, is realizing that some family relationships were only sustainable when they were unhealthy. Once you become a whole person with boundaries and self-respect, some people don't know how to relate to you anymore. That observation perfectly captured my situation with my parents and Rachel. We'd had almost no contact since the wedding, and the few interactions we'd had were strained and superficial. They seemed to be waiting for me to apologize and return to my old role, while I was hoping they'd recognize that the old dynamic had been harmful to everyone involved. Sarah continued to be my primary connection to family news, and her updates painted a picture of ongoing dysfunction. My parents were apparently struggling financially in ways they'd never admitted before, and they were putting pressure on David to step into the provider role I'd vacated. But David, who had his own family and mortgage, couldn't provide the kind of support they'd come to expect from me. Your mom asked me if I thought you'd be willing to help with their roof repair, Sarah told me during one of our regular check-ins. I told her that ship had sailed and they needed to figure out their own financial planning. It was painful to hear that my parents were struggling, but I also recognized that their difficulties were largely the result of poor financial decisions and an expectation that their children would always be available to solve their problems. They'd never learned to live within their means because they'd always had me as a backup plan. The most significant development in my new life was the decision to pursue a master's degree in financial planning. I'd been thinking about it for years, but I'd never felt like I had the time or resources to commit to additional education. Now, with my increased salary and my newfound clarity about my priorities, it felt like the perfect time to invest in my own future. The application process required me to write essays about my career goals and motivation for pursuing advanced education. As I worked on those essays, I found myself reflecting on how much my perspective had changed over the past year. My interest in financial planning stems from a personal understanding of how money can be used to manipulate relationships and control behavior. I wrote in one essay, I want to help people develop healthy financial boundaries and use their resources to build authentic security rather than to purchase approval from others. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday morning and I called Sarah immediately to share the news. Emma, this is incredible, she said. Aunt Margaret would be so proud. She always said you were meant for bigger things than just managing other people's financial crises. As I hung up the phone, I looked around my bright, beautiful apartment, the physical manifestation of a life I was finally building for myself. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about the future, about the person I was becoming, about the relationships I was creating. I was no longer the desperate, pathetic sister trying to buy love with my checkbook. I was Emma Sinclair, financial professional, community volunteer, valued friend, and independent woman who knew her own worth. 1 year after Rachel's wedding, I was featured in Financial Planning magazine for my work with young entrepreneurs and my innovative approach to teaching financial literacy. The article, titled Breaking Generational Cycles: How One Advisor Helps Clients Navigate Family Financial Dynamics, included a photo of me in my office surrounded by thank you letters from clients and workshop participants. The journalist who interviewed me had been particularly interested in my personal story, though I'd been careful about how much detail to share. You speak with such authority about family financial boundaries, she'd said. It's clear this comes from personal experience, not just professional training. She was right. Everything I now taught others about healthy financial relationships had been learned through my own painful but ultimately liberating experience with my family. The boundaries I helped clients establish, the red flags I taught them to recognize, the strategies I shared for maintaining relationships while protecting financial well-being, all of it came from lessons I'd learned the hard way. Reading the article, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. This recognition was based on my own merits, my own expertise, my own contribution to my profession and and community. No one could take it away from me or diminish it with criticism. The magazine feature led to speaking invitations and consulting opportunities that I never could have imagined when I was quietly managing my investment portfolio while funding other people's dreams. I was building a reputation as someone who understood the intersection of money and family dynamics, and organizations were paying me well to share that expertise. But the most meaningful response to the article came from an unexpected source, Marcus. He called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice careful and respectful. "Emma, I saw the magazine article. I wanted to congratulate you and also to apologize for how everything went down with the wedding." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by his reaching out. "How are you and Rachel doing?" There was a long pause. "We're working through some things. The first year of marriage has been challenging, and a lot of it has to do with family dynamics and money issues. Rachel's been in therapy, actually trying to understand some patterns she's starting to recognize." I was surprised to hear that Rachel was seeking professional help. It suggested a level of self-awareness that I hadn't seen from her during our confrontation. "I'm glad she's getting support," I said carefully. "That takes courage." "She asked me to tell you that she's sorry," Marcus continued, "not just for what she said about you at the dress fitting, but for the whole dynamic. She's starting to understand how unfair it was to expect you to fund our wedding, and how cruel her words were." It was an apology I'd never expected to receive, and I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part just felt sad about all the pain and lost time that could have been avoided if we'd been able to have honest conversations earlier. "I appreciate her acknowledging that," I said, "and I hope therapy helps her build healthier relationships going forward." "Would you ever be open to talking with her?" Marcus asked. "Not about money or the past, just about maybe finding a way to be sisters again." I thought about it carefully before answering. "Maybe someday, but any relationship we rebuild would have to be completely different from what we had before. I'm not going back to being the family bank, and I'm not going to accept being treated as less than human." "I understand," he said, "and I think she's starting to understand that too." After we hung up, I felt a complex mix of emotions. I was glad that Rachel was apparently working on herself, but I also knew that real change would take time and consistent effort. One apology, even a sincere one, didn't erase years of manipulation and cruelty. A few months later, I received a more direct communication from Rachel herself, a handwritten letter that arrived with no fanfare or explanation. "Emma," it read, "I've been in therapy for 8 months now, and I'm finally starting to understand how toxic my behavior was toward you. I treated you like an ATM instead of a sister, and I said things about you that were cruel and completely unacceptable. I know that apologizing doesn't undo the damage, but I want you to know that I'm working on becoming a better person. I hope someday you might be willing to give me a chance to prove that I can be the sister you deserved all along." The letter was signed simply Rachel, with no demands for immediate forgiveness or expectations of reconciliation. It felt like the first honest communication I'd ever received from her. I kept the letter, but I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to process my feelings and decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted to have with my family members. The boundaries I'd established weren't punishment, they were protection, and they would remain in place until I felt confident that the underlying dynamics had genuinely changed. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. They'd made a few overtures over the year, mostly through Sarah or David, but nothing that indicated real understanding of why I'd needed to establish boundaries. They seemed to view the whole situation as a temporary disagreement that would eventually blow over, rather than a fundamental restructuring of how our family interacted. That was okay with me. I'd learned that I couldn't control other people's willingness to grow or change, but I could control my own responses to their behavior. I maintained polite but distant contact, and I no longer felt guilty about protecting my emotional and financial well-being. The most profound change in my life was internal. I no longer defined my worth by other people's approval, or measured my success by how much I could sacrifice for others. I'd learned to value my own dreams, my own goals, my own happiness as much as I'd once valued my family's. This shift showed up in every area of my life. I traveled more, invested in experiences that brought me joy, decorated my apartment with art that I loved rather than furniture that was merely functional. I dated with confidence, knowing that I was looking for a partner rather than someone to save or someone who would save me. The financial literacy work continued to be deeply fulfilling, but I'd also started writing a book about family financial dynamics. The working title was The Price of Love: Breaking Free from Financial Manipulation, and I hoped it would help other people recognize and escape the patterns I'd experienced. As I worked on the final chapter of that book, I reflected on everything I'd learned over the past year. The most important lesson was that healthy relationships don't require you to sacrifice your well-being to prove your love. Real love, whether between family members, friends, or romantic partners, supports your growth rather than demanding your diminishment. I'd also learned that you can't save people who don't want to be saved, and you can't force people to value you appropriately, but you can value yourself appropriately, and that changes everything. On the 1-year anniversary of canceling Rachel's wedding check, I went to the bank and met with Mr. Peterson again. My investment portfolio had grown substantially, both from market gains and from my increased earning potential. But more importantly, every dollar in that account represented my own choices, my own priorities, my own dreams. You've done remarkable work building your wealth, he said as we reviewed my annual portfolio summary. But more than that, you've built a financial life that aligns with your values. That's much rarer than people realize. Walking out of the bank that day, I thought about the person I'd been a year earlier, desperate for family approval, willing to sacrifice my entire savings for someone who saw me as pathetic and boring. That version of myself felt like a stranger now, someone I could barely recognize. I was no longer that person, and I would never be that person again. I'd learned too much about my own worth, developed too much respect for my own boundaries, built too many authentic relationships to go back to accepting crumbs of affection in exchange for financial sacrifice. The woman I'd become was someone I genuinely liked and respected, someone who was generous but not exploitable, loving but not desperate, successful but not isolated, someone who understood that the best gift you can give to the people you love is a healthy, whole version of yourself. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough.